President Yoon Suk-yeol attended the fifth hearing of his impeachment trial today at the Constitutional Court. He denied allegations that he had ordered military commanders to pull lawmakers out of the National Assembly to prevent them from voting down his martial law decree, while a former Capitol Defense Command commander also denied such orders were given as he took the stand. OpenAI founder Sam Altman visits South Korea to expand AI collaboration amid a fierce global AI race. He held a series of meetings today with business moguls, one of which involved Samsung chairman Lee Jae-yoon and SoftBank CEO Masayoshi Son. With a 10% tariff on Chinese imports into the U.S. taking effect, China hits back with targeted tariffs on U.S. goods. This follows President Trump's tariffs on Canada and Mexico on pause for 1 month. It's February 4th, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We start today at the Constitutional Court, where the fifth hearing of the impeachment trial against President Yoon began this afternoon. For more, our correspondent Oh Soo-young is standing by live. Soo-young, today's hearings are still ongoing, and it includes a lineup of key witnesses, and eyes are now on what they said.
Good evening, Chongmin. Yes, indeed. The fifth impeachment trial hearing for President Yoon, it began at around 2 p.m. today with the president in attendance and 3 testimonies at 90 minutes each. Now, the 3 witnesses who were called in by the court today, they include figures who were involved in the execution of martial law on December 3rd. And based on their previous statements, the focus of the questions today is very much on whether they were ordered to first break into the National Assembly, prevent a parliamentary vote to revoke martial law, and also to arrest key political figures. Now, first up was Lee Jin-woo, former commander of the military's Capital Defense Command, who is currently under arrest. He has reportedly said he would receive phone calls from Yoon to enter the National Assembly by force, firing weapons if necessary, and drag out legislators to stop them from overturning martial law. However, when he showed up at the court today, he denied that he'd been ordered by Yoon to arrest lawmakers. He also said he was not ordered by former Defense Minister Kim Jong-un to enter the Assembly building and prevent a vote to lift martial law. He refused to confirm or answer most questions posed by the National Assembly side about whether he had received calls or orders from President Yoon, despite the record showing investigation records showing that he stated Yoon called him 3 times. Former Chief of the Defense Counterintelligence Command Arirang also testified while under arrest. He reportedly received orders to arrest and detain key figures, including opposition leader Lee Jae-myung and former ruling party leader Han Dong-un. But he avoided answering key questions at the questioning today, citing his ongoing legal case. The questioning of former Deputy Director of the National Intelligence Service, Hong Jang-won, also began. He reiterated what he'd previously stated at the National Assembly, saying that he'd been ordered to, quote, clear out completely, but wasn't sure who or what the target was.
It seems the questioning session had some twists and turns, with President Yoon commenting as well.
That's right, Tommy. There were clear discrepancies in some cases, in some testimonies with what had been said previously in previous statements, showing the real need for the justices to verify some primary questions, which include, of course, whether President Yoon had directly issued orders on the night of the martial law decree. And as for the president, he spent most of the trial with his eyes closed. The court banned him from questioning witnesses today, so he was unable to address his former officials himself, as he did with the former defense minister. But when given the chance to speak, Yoon showed cynicism with the questioning, emphasizing that, quote, nothing had actually happened, and that discussing whether instructions were given or received seemed rather pointless to him.
이번 그 사건을 보면은 실제 아무런 일도 일어나지 않았는데 뭐 지시를 했니, 지시를 받았니, 뭐 이런 얘기들이 마치 그 어떤 호수 위에 떠 있는 달 그림자 같은 거를 쫓아가는 그런 느낌을 좀 많이 받았고요.
He once again cast doubt over allegations that he'd ordered lawmakers to be dragged out of the National Assembly and for political figures to be detained. He said he'd ordered troops to be pulled out and that soldiers deployed that evening must have misinterpreted directions from him and the defense minister.
그런 상황에서 과연 처음에 14명, 나중에 이제 군 철수 지시하고 계엄 해제 나고 군 철수 지시가 이루어졌는데 그게 과연 상식적으로 가능한 얘기인지.
But he also said he told the former defense minister to send troops to the National Election Commission, once again raising suspicions of election fraud as a pretext for declaring martial law. During his previous hearings, the president has denied the major allegations that he'd ordered martial law decrees to be executed that night.
So-young, it may be tough to tell, but when can we expect an actual verdict?
Well, for now, there are 3 more trial hearings scheduled until February 13. That's next Thursday. But it's unclear at this point whether the justices will be able to wrap up the case by then or whether they'll decide to summon more witnesses to really cross-check and verify the facts. And while the conflicting testimonies may require more witnesses to confirm whether Yoon directly issued martial law orders, also whether the decrees were unconstitutional, and whether he had pre-planned the martial law. Yoon's team has applied for at least 31 witnesses, and the court is apparently still reviewing the candidates. Also, as Yoon's representatives continue to fiercely challenge the court's proceedings, experts say that the trial could be lengthened substantially. However, most believe the ruling will be made before 2 justices retire from the bench on April 18th to avoid further procedural delays and complications.
All right, So-young, thanks for the coverage. That was our Oh So-young with the latest on the president's impeachment trial at the Constitutional Court. Meanwhile, former Army Special Warfare Commander Kwak Jong-un today reaffirmed that he was ordered by President Yoon to drag lawmakers out from the National Assembly when martial law was imposed on December 3rd. At a hearing on Tuesday of an Assembly Special Committee investigating the Yoon administration's alleged insurrection plan, Kwak testified that at the time, no troop members were inside the building. His claim contradicts that of former Defense Minister Kim Jong-un at a Constitutional Court hearing that Yoon ordered members of the military, not members of the Assembly, to be removed. Kwak will testify at the Constitutional Court's 6th hearing on Thursday. At the Seoul Detention Center earlier this afternoon, people backing the president gathered outside the center, braving the day's frigid conditions to share their moral support. Our Choi Min-jung was there.
A freezing cold Tuesday. Despite the bitterly cold weather, dozens of President Yoon Suk-yeol's supporters gathered at the Seoul Detention Center to cheer for Yoon, with the president heading to the Constitutional Court for the 5th hearing of his impeachment trial. Supporters sang and chanted loudly, banging on drums. One supporter attempted to enter the detention center but was stopped by police. There was also a small number of people protesting in favor of Yoon's impeachment. The police has deployed heavy security and buses on site to prevent any potential physical clashes between those for and against the impeachment. On Wednesday, officials from the National Assembly's Special Committee on the Insurrection Investigation are scheduled to visit the detention center to question Yoon in person, as he has refused to attend previous committee hearings. But it remains to be seen whether Yoon will comply with the investigation. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
OpenAI founder Sam Altman is here in Seoul for a number of events and meetings aimed at advancing AI collaboration. Our correspondent Lee Soo-jin covers his agenda here.
ChatGPT developer OpenAI is looking to expand its presence in the South Korean market as Chinese startup DeepSeek poses a challenge to its position in the tech industry. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, during a closed-door workshop held in Seoul on Tuesday, said that with its robust semiconductor and energy industries, Korea is a country that is actively adopting artificial intelligence. This marks Altman's third visit to South Korea and the first time an official OpenAI event took place in the country. As part of its efforts to stay competitive, OpenAI announced that it has entered into a joint strategic partnership with South Korea's leading messaging app operator, Kakao.
I think we have a shared vision for what AI can do. We are particularly interested in AI and messaging. I think there's a really rich thing to explore there that can improve the experience a lot for users.
Kakao CEO Jung Sina said on Tuesday that upcoming key Kakao services such as Kanana, an AI-integrated messenger app, will utilize OpenAI's latest AI technology APIs, application programming interfaces that allow developers to integrate OpenAI's language models such as ChatGPT into their own apps. But Kakao isn't the only Korean company OpenAI is planning to work more closely with, as Altman also met with SK Group chairman Choi Tae-won immediately after the workshop on Tuesday. Choi and Altman reportedly discussed potential areas of collaboration between OpenAI and SK Group, such as the supply of high-bandwidth memory from SK Hynix and the construction of an AI data center by SK Telecom. And in the afternoon, Altman met with Samsung Electronics chairman Lee Jae-yong and SoftBank CEO Masayoshi Son, who flew in from Japan in the morning to attend the meeting, which lasted for 2 hours. This comes after SoftBank and OpenAI on Monday agreed to set up a joint venture in Japan, with SoftBank also committing to investing $3 billion annually to utilize OpenAI's technology. The three discussed ways to expand AI collaboration, namely Samsung Electronics' potential participation in the Stargate project, a $500 billion AI infrastructure initiative supported by U.S. President Donald Trump. 이수진, Arirang News.
U.S. tariffs on Canada and Mexico have been delayed for 30 days, but the additional 10% tax on Chinese imports have been put in place. China responded with retaliatory tariffs. An Sung-jin reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump's 10% tariff on Chinese products took effect just after midnight Tuesday. This means that all Chinese goods going into the country will be levied under the trade measures. China immediately hit back with retaliatory taxes of its own. The country's Customs Tariff Commission of the State Council announced that certain U.S. products, such as petroleum or agricultural machinery, will have a 10% tariff, while coal and LNG will be levied 15%, starting on the 10th. This comes as Trump stated that he will be talking with China on deals regarding stopping the flow of fentanyl in the Panama Canal. However, whether Trump will strike a deal with China remains unclear, as Beijing's ambassador to the United Nations, Fu Chang, reaffirmed the country's position during a press conference at the UN headquarters early Tuesday, stating that China will file a lawsuit with the World Trade Organization and implement countermeasures regarding Trump's tariffs. Unlike China, less than a day ahead of Trump's imposition of 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, the tariffs have been postponed for at least a month. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Monday local time posted on X that he had a good call with President Trump, signaling that a deal has been struck. The deal includes implementing a $1.3 billion border plan, which includes reinforcing the border with nearly 10,000 frontline personnel, as well as strengthening resources to respond to fentanyl and money laundering. The agreement with Canada comes only hours after Trump announced a similar deal with Mexico. Just a day before U.S. tariffs were to take place, Mexico agreed to also place 10,000 National Guard troops along the U.S. border to prevent the flow of drugs.
I told him we wanted him to pause the tariffs, so we've reached that agreement. I'm sure that during this month, we'll be able to deliver good results for his people and the people of Mexico.
Over the next month, the U.S. and Mexico will be negotiating on trade and security issues before a final decision on whether to implement full tariffs. Concerns over a global tariff war sparked by Trump are still high, as he also warned of tariffs to the European Union.
When targeted, unfairly or arbitrarily, the European Union will respond firmly.
Whether these trial periods for Canada and Mexico will lead to successful tariff deals is unclear. Negotiations could see the U.S. adding on trade issues, and concrete results may not appear regarding drug trafficking or illegal immigration issues. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump has recently shown his intention to engage in talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. But this gesture looks to be met by Kim maintaining a hardline approach. Today, we take a closer look at another possible dialogue between these two men. Our correspondent Kim Bo-kyung joins us here in the studio. Bo-kyung, North Korea's first response towards the Trump administration was not that friendly. Tell us more about that and what is Pyongyang thinking?
All right, Jung-min. Well, as you have already said, North Korea recently released its first official criticism of Trump administration, condemning the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, calling it a rogue state while he was having an interview with a journalist. And regarding this, the regime's foreign ministry spokesperson said on Monday that Rubio's remarks reaffirm how Washington's hostile policy toward the North remains unchanged, and that the regime will not tolerate any provocation by the U.S. This comes after Trump said late last month that he planned to engage with Kim.
He happens to be a smart guy. Kim Jong-un is a smart guy.
Well, this raised the prospects of a potential dialogue between Trump and Kim. And instead of responding to this, however, Pyongyang is sending a message to Washington via its foreign ministry, which said that if there was no change in words or actions from the U.S. regarding its hostile policy, then the North would continue its hardline approach. And also with Kim visiting a nuclear material production base. And one expert says Pyongyang wants preconditions to be met for a dialogue to resume.
Pyongyang is demanding the U.S. to respect its sovereignty, not to interfere in its internal affairs, and to suspend South Korea-U.S. joint military exercises.
If this dialogue does happen, what are the chances of Trump going for the so-called small deal?
Well, to answer that question, Jung-min, we first need to talk about what exactly a small deal is. A small deal is an initial or intermediate step toward the ultimate goal of complete denuclearization. However, for now, a big deal is unfeasible at the moment, with even officials and experts being pessimistic about it. And thus, the small deal is deemed a more pragmatic approach, primarily focusing on reducing the nuclear and missile threat North Korea poses to the U.S., such as with a nuclear freeze and halt to weapons tests, particularly ICBMs. Trump would want to see some achievement within his term, so he will likely go for this first. And experts say if it is such a small deal, it would be a big achievement.
If the small deal goes well and mutual trust is built, it can serve as a foundation for the next step, ultimately leading to complete denuclearization. However, the current level of distrust between North Korea and the U.S. is so deep that even achieving a small deal would be considered a significant success.
Well, one thing we need to note is that while the U.S. aims to manage North Korea's nuclear threats through a disarmament deal instead of complete denuclearization, there is the possibility the U.S. might suspend joint military exercises with South Korea.
In the past, a moratorium was implemented with Pyongyang agreeing to suspend nuclear tests and ICBM launches, while Washington scaled down South Korea-US joint military exercises and stopped the deployment of strategic assets to the Korean peninsula. Trump could consider such similar measures again.
If the two men, Kim and Trump, do start such negotiations, some express concerns that South Korea could be left out.
Right. Given that North Korean leader is sending messages to Trump, hinting at preconditions for the talks to resume, we cannot be sure when they will meet, but we can be sure about the possibility of the dialogue to begin soon. Now, considering the political turmoil South Korea is dealing with, we cannot say Seoul's preparations for a potential Kim-Trump summit are enough. Experts say, however, the U.S. would not be able to just leave out its allies' say regarding the issue.
There will be sufficient discussions between Seoul and Washington over the agenda, location and timing of the talks before Washington starts contacting Pyongyang. Also, the US will try to persuade North Korea to engage in inter-Korean dialogue, either before the North Korea-US talks or concurrently with them.
All right, thank you, Bo-kyung, for the explanation.
My pleasure.
On the cultural front, there's exciting news, especially for musical lovers. One of Korea's longest-running and most beloved homegrown musicals is back on stage in downtown Seoul. Our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin gives us a closer look.
It's one of the most iconic lines in Korean musical history, bringing the final moment of Queen Min to life on stage. The Last Empress tells the story of Queen Min, also known as Empress Myeongseong, the wife of Gojong, the 26th king of the Joseon dynasty and the first emperor of the short-lived Korean Empire. She was assassinated in 1895 by Japanese forces who saw her as a threat to their growing influence in Korea. This homegrown musical premiered in 1995, exactly a century after her death.
When I was creating this production, I was searching for a story that could teach history while also being moving and entertaining. Later, when we took the production abroad, people were amazed that we had transformed such a painful chapter of our history into art.
Over the past 30 years, The Last Empress has earned its reputation as a living legend of Korean musicals. It was the first Asian musical to be staged on Broadway and the West End. Even in its 22nd season now, the production continues to evolve.
The show was mostly sung through, but we've gradually incorporated more spoken dialogue to enhance storytelling. We've also revived key musical numbers and restructured some scenes to make historical events and information clearer for audiences.
This season boasts its most star-studded lineup to date. Renowned musical actresses Kim So-hyun, Shin Young-suk, and Cha Ji-yeon take turns portraying Queen Min. The cast includes both returning veterans and fresh faces, bringing new energy to the production.
I think this musical stays alive because it never settles, always pushing forward. Being part of it pushes me too. Just when I think I've given my all, I discover new emotions, new ways to interpret the role. That's the beauty of the show. It grows with time, just like we do.
Even before I entered musical theater, I knew The Last Empress was legendary, as even my mother had seen it before. It's also one of the few historical musicals in Korea. Now, being part of it, I realize just how special and timeless this production is. It's an honor to carry on its legacy.
And the show isn't resting on its legacy, setting its sights on a future spanning over a century. That effort continues live on stage, night after night. So the current season of the musical The Last Empress is on stage at the Sejong Center for the Performing Arts' Sejong Grand Theater until March 30th. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
There's a strong cold spell all over the country. Cold wave warnings and advisories are in effect in most parts of the country with freezing conditions. The coldest place this morning was mountains Arirang, where temperatures plummeted to nearly minus 23 degrees Celsius. This cold spell will be seen tomorrow as well. As the heavy snow warnings continue to expand, snow will become thicker on the west coast of Chungcheongnam-do province. Heavy snow of as much as 40 centimeters will fall in the mountainous areas of Jeju Island and more than 30 centimeters in Jeollabuk-do province by Thursday. Tomorrow morning's Seoul will be as cold as today, dropping to minus 12 degrees Celsius. Daegu and Gyeongju minus 9 degrees. Seoul will move up to minus 5 degrees, and Gwangju will move up to minus 1 degree. This cold spell will continue throughout the week. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
Step into a world where culture speaks beyond words, bridging hearts and minds. Hello, this is your DJ Sujung for Culture Crunch. Crunch on a new flavour of K-culture with me every day.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring you today's most pressing issues from across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-kyun. As the war in Gaza entered a ceasefire, the world is keeping close tabs on how the three-year-old war between Russia and Ukraine will unfold, especially with new leadership in the United States. U.S. President Donald Trump on Friday said that his administration has already had various serious discussions with Russian officials about the war, and that he and Russian President Vladimir Putin could soon take significant action toward ending the conflict. Putin echoed Trump's assertions that the crisis could have been avoided if he remained in office, indicating his willingness to engage in dialogue. NATO's ongoing support for Ukraine and talks of potential peace negotiations are also ongoing as the world struggles to find a path to end the war. For more on this, we invite Pan Gil-chiu, assistant professor at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy, with us. Welcome, Professor.
Hello, good to be with you.
And also joining us online is Malcolm Davis, Senior Analyst at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
So let's start with Dr. Davis. Trump has suggested that the U.S. is engaging in very serious discussions with Russia regarding the war. What are the possible implications of such talks, and how could they impact future diplomatic efforts in the region?
Well, clearly Trump has not managed to end the war in a single day, which was his claim as he was running for re-election. So he's now president. He's now engaged in discussions through his intermediaries, Keith Kellogg, with the Russians. And I think that basically what Trump is trying to do is to find a formula that basically brings the war to an end in a manner that does not leave him looking weak, that does not leave him essentially being seen to give in to Moscow. But at the same time, he's determined not to be drawn into an extended support of Ukraine, as was the case with the Biden administration. And I think that the risk is that that formula will not be found, and Trump will then be faced with the choice of either ramping up support for Ukraine, which is probably what he should be doing, in order to give Ukraine some chance of winning the war, or essentially the riskier option is that essentially he turns away, maybe does a deal with Russia that abandons Ukraine. That sends a terrible signal and a precedent for the future. So he's trying to find a path forward. I'm not sure that he'll succeed. And the key thing here to remember is that from Putin's perspective, he's under no pressure to find a ceasefire. Because he's slowly winning this war on the battleground.
Then what about Professor Ban? How do you assess the potential benefits and also risks of direct U.S.-Russia negotiations?
Well, we need to differentiate between short-term benefits and long-term gains. In this regard, I will say that if the United States will attempt to make negotiations directly with Russia without sufficiently hearing from Ukraine, risks would be greater than benefits. To start with, when it comes to the potential benefits, since these direct negotiations aimed at terminating the long-lasting war on the Eurasian battlefield, the level of military confrontation might become lower than now. In particular, in a situation where Trump threatens to impose additional sanctions to Russia as part of the maximized pressure, a temporary ceasefire might be feasible, similar to the one in Israel and Hamas. However, these potential benefits are based on short-term gains. Accordingly, in terms of the potential risks, first of all, the fact that Trump directly meets Putin could send a misguided signal to the international community that Russia is now back to a normal state diplomatically. This signal is bad for preserving a rules-based order in the world because it could mean that an aggressor is not punished in the right way. Second, these direct negotiations could have a negative impact on how to end the war in the right way. If Trump embraces Putin's request that the war should be finished at the current front line or fighting line, geopolitical risks will be greater later on. In fact, there is little possibility that Putin pulls his forces back to the border line before the war. With this insight in mind, if this result happens indeed, a fundamental principle of sovereignty will be broken significantly. Finally, the League of Like-Minded Countries will be weaker because this dialogue, these direct negotiations are underway in a situation where Trump bashes his allies like Canada through tariffs. To make a long story short, these direct negotiations appear to be based on short-term benefits away from long-term gains or long-lasting geopolitical stability.
Right. The discussions just between the two parties without Ukraine could be very swifted in one side. Now, the war in Ukraine is going for its third year now. At this current point, now, Dr. Davis, what kind of role do you think the U.S. can actually realistically play in ending the conflict, and how might this evolve under the Trump administration?
Well, look, what they should be doing is supporting Ukraine to enable Ukraine to force the Russians back out of their territory, including out of Crimea, and bringing about a decisive Ukrainian victory, and then opening Ukraine up to full NATO membership. That would be the best solution, the fairest solution, and the most just solution. I think that where you are likely to see the Trump administration go is pressuring Ukraine to bring about some sort of temporary ceasefire that gives Trump a face-saving solution that he can claim a win. At the same time, Trump has made it very clear that he wants access to Ukraine's rare earth materials as essentially a quid pro quo for continuing any support for Ukraine militarily. And I think that the key thing to remember once again is how Putin sees all of this. If Putin sees Trump willing to sign a deal with Russia that essentially disadvantages Ukraine and advantages Russia and basically rewards Russian aggression, all that's going to do is embolden Russia to essentially rebuild and regroup its forces during any ceasefire and then launch the war again in a year or two to take more territory. Because Putin has made it very clear that he doesn't necessarily want peace. What he wants is to create a new sphere of influence in Central and Eastern Europe and to dictate the terms of NATO's capitulation within that sphere. And I think that Putin believes that he can outlast the Ukrainians and he can outlast the West, and he can essentially exploit Trump's willingness to do a deal to achieve his longer-term strategic aim. So I think the professor is right. Trump is thinking short-term gains without thinking long-term strategy, and that's a real trap.
Mm-hmm. So with this, Putin has echoed Trump's claim that the conflict in Ukraine could have been avoided if Trump had remained in office. Professor Bond, do you agree with this assessment? And what could have been different in U.S. Russia ties during Trump's first term that may have prevented the current crisis?
To be honest with you, I don't agree with the argument because Putin's war has a long history and has been made under a big picture, which has nothing to do with a specific event or a characteristic of American leadership. When Putin seized political power in 2000, his ambitious objective was to return Russia to the status of the Soviet Union. In short, he wanted the revival of Russia. To that end, he has adopted a grand geopolitical strategy developed by Alexander Dugin. Under this geopolitical strategy, in 2008, Putin went to the Second Chechen War, and then in 2014, he annexed Crimea. Likewise, in 2022, Putin invaded Ukraine. If so, why does Putin pretend to agree with Trump's claim that if he were president, the war with Ukraine could not have taken place? First, this argument is based on Putin's calculation to better deal with Trump's transactional approach. By pretending that Putin agrees with Trump and following Trump's leadership, he seeks to have a better position for maximizing gains from negotiations. Second, Putin's agreement with Trump is intended to make him get out of his diplomatic isolation from the international community by emphasizing his direct communication with Trump, a leader of a great power in the world. Putin believes that direct negotiation served as a golden momentum for him to return to a diplomatic arena officially. In short, his agreement is calculated strategically, transactionally, and diplomatically. In the meantime, if Trump were president, Putin might have paid more attention to making a transactional approach with Trump because he knows that Trump likes it. However, even if these temporal transactions might have prevented the war in 2022, war would have been unavoidable, and it could take place later in 2023 or in 2024 because of Putin's war policy based on geopolitical strategy. So what matters for war prevention is deterrent capability, not a short-sighted transaction.
Right, so the agreement was just a part of his strategy to maintain negotiations with Washington. Now, NATO Chief Mark Rutte mentioned having ideas for potential peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, but he said it's a secret. He says it will be effective in preventing Putin from trying to conquer Ukraine again. Professor, how do you think realistic is this goal, and what kind of steps do you think NATO and the West could take to ensure that this could happen?
Well, NATO Chief Rutte's argument shows how seriously NATO has been examining numerous scenarios of a potential peace. This potential peace appears to aim at preventing Russia from ever invading Ukraine again, rather than a transactional approach or an architecture of a win-win for both actors of Ukraine and Russia that makes peace feasible. In particular, I'm not sure whether it is feasible because Putin does not want any architecture that his military forces make it hard to invade Ukraine later on. Moreover, Rutte does not seem to have brought this issue or agenda to the table with Putin in the sense that he said it is a little secret. I'm not sure whether what is their idea. It could be a scenario in which, in the first step, NATO helps Ukraine improve its military forces significantly, and then in the second phase, it allows Ukraine to join NATO under the condition that Ukraine yields some of the territory occupied by Russia. If not, it could be a scenario that a European defense force is established differently from NATO forces and then is deployed in Ukraine as a deterrent force by adopting President Macron's proposal of a European defense initiative. Or, as Dr. Davis mentioned earlier, it could be related to Trump's recent transactional approach with Ukraine, that the United States can continue its military support to Ukraine under the condition that the United States signs a rare earth access agreement with Ukraine. Meanwhile, the effort itself is meaningful, but making it become real is not going to be easy because this idea makes it hard to equally persuade each of the two parties, Ukraine and Russia. To top it up, whatever that idea is, it might take a long time to be realized as an effective remedy.
Right. So as of now, we really don't know what the secret idea is. But the NATO chief said the primary focus should be supporting Ukraine with weapons and training. So, Dr. Davis, how effective do you think this approach has been so far in helping Ukraine defend itself against Russia's military advances?
Look, I think when Ukraine has been given that military support that it needed, it has been quite effective. The Ukrainians have, in many respects, fought the Russians to a standstill. I think where things have gone wrong is that they launched a counteroffensive in 2020, late 2022, that failed, and then there was a lack of support, sufficient support from the West to allow them to regroup. And so now the Ukrainians are facing manpower shortages. They're facing shortages in terms of munitions and weapons capabilities. And so the Russians are making a slow, grinding advance in key areas such as the Donbass, in particular around Pokrovsk. And I think that the risk is that if that military support fades away, if we don't continue to support Ukraine, then the Russians will break through in key areas, particularly around Pokrovsk, and then make much quicker advances towards Kyiv and Kharkiv in the north, and also Odessa in the south. And I think that that would be catastrophic because the Russians could then claim much more Ukrainian territory and then say we're ready for a ceasefire on our terms. What that does then is give the Russians time to regroup and then be ready to either launch further attacks in the near future, in a year or two, to claim more territory, or worse still, they would see NATO weakness or a lack of US support of NATO as an opportunity to make a move elsewhere against NATO. For example, you're seeing Russian hybrid warfare attacks occurring in the Baltic Seas against submarine cables. Those are different Russian attacks against NATO here in the grey zone. Those could easily become more traditional kinetic attacks in areas such as the Baltic states. So the real risk here is that if we don't get this right, we actually lay the groundwork for a much wider war in a year or two that emerges out of Ukraine and spreads into Europe itself. And that's why I think you see Mark Rutte, Macron, and others in Europe starting to take this very seriously and starting to think, actually, Europe does need to stand on its own because we can't count on the US under Trump.
Now, let's also touch upon North Korean involvement. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky recently warned that North Korea could send additional troops, probably 20,000 to 25,000, to Russia. How do you see the changes and how significant is this development, Professor Bond?
Well, I do believe that the additional deployment of North Korean troops is highly likely because Kim Jong-un and Putin are satisfied with this strategic deal. Kim Jong-un makes money from this strategic deal, and furthermore, he believes that North Korea can be a recognized nuclear power under the strong support of Russia thanks to this strategic deal. Putin can expect more forces and more ammunition, which is needed not only to win the war, but also to step up his leverage over the United States and Ukraine in the possible peace talks. What is interesting is that the additional deployment of North Korean troops has an impact on not only the direction of peace talks on the Russia-Ukraine war, but also the direction of a potential Trump-Kim Jong-un summit. Furthermore, I will say that the additional deployment of North Korean troops will bolster the mechanism of geopolitical convergence that security on the Eurasian geopolitical region cannot be separated from security on the Korean Peninsula. It means that Russia has turned into serious military threat to South Korea, and geopolitical risks are vital to the world. In short, the additional deployment of North Korean troops has a ripple effect on security on the Korean Peninsula, regional security, and even international security.
Right, so this deepening ties between the two countries are really concerning at this point. What about Dr. Davis? How do you view Russia's increasing ties with North Korea, with North Korea's recent military support for Russia? What kind of impact could this have on Russia's military capabilities and also its position on the global stage?
Well, look, I think at the grand strategic level, you need to see the situation, the war in Ukraine, and now with North Korean forces joining the fight alongside Russia as part of a wider contest between an axis of authoritarian states, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, that are working together to confront and overturn the international order that is based on the governance of liberal democratic systems. So this needs to be seen as a global contest, a global confrontation between authoritarianism on the one hand and liberal democracy on the other. And the North Korean decision to support Russia initially with weapons and now directly with troops is part of that global contest, that global confrontation. And so I think that what you will see is the North Koreans continuing to provide weapons and personnel, additional army forces to go into the fight in Ukraine. In return, the North Koreans are getting all sorts of access to technologies related to their nuclear weapons program, in particular as a relation to tactical nuclear weapons, missile delivery systems, and also space launch capabilities. So there's a real quid pro quo there that Pyongyang and Moscow are working together. China is watching this with some concern because ultimately it's China that wants to manage the relationship with Pyongyang. It doesn't want Moscow to have the dominant hand there. But this is, I think, part of a broader contest, a broader confrontation between authoritarianism and liberal democracy on the other hand, that is just getting started and that could last many, many years.
Right. So Dr. Davis just touched upon the influence of this collaboration between the two countries, but with reported losses of North Korean troops in Russia and the fact that they're also gaining modern warfare experience, Professor Bond, how might this experience influence the future military capabilities of North Korea, especially if they return to their home country?
Well, battlefield experience itself, simply beyond a modern warfare experience, really matters to how to fight better. And when soldiers believe that they fight well, a political leader is better positioned to use military forces for achieving his political objectives. Under the logic of this mechanism, modern warfare experience makes Kim Jong-un's miscalculation more likely in terms of the Second Korean War ambition. As a matter of fact, although North Korea has developed many weapons, both conventional and nuclear, and made numerous provocations, its troops have not had any war experience since the Korean War until this war against Ukraine. Likewise, North Korea has stick to a traditional war strategy based upon massive amount of ground troops, which is far away from modern warfare. Meanwhile, the deployment of North Korean soldiers on the battlefield makes this posture be changed significantly. So what happens if North Korean troops return to their home country? Now the North Korean forces have had a real battlefield experience and have learned the modern warfare like drone warfare. I believe that North Korea will rush to seriously develop a new military strategy that incorporates modern warfare for the Korean Peninsula theater. What does that mean? It means that North Korea is equipped with an effective strategy as well as massive conventional forces and nuclear weapons. On the contrary, South Korean troops have not had war experience after the Vietnam War and are not armed with nuclear weapons. This disparity makes military and strategic balance unfunctional so that it ends up being militarily disadvantageous to South Korea and advantageous to North Korea. In the sense, South Korean troops should pay tremendous attention to bolstering military readiness by offsetting this imbalance so that deterrence will be able to be continued.
Right. So with this ongoing cooperation between the two countries, South Korea must gear up for any possibilities. Now, I'm afraid we'll have to leave our discussion right here. We're running out of time. But thank you so much for your insights tonight, Professor Ban and Dr. Davis. We appreciate it so much.
Thanks for having me.
That'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.